January 10th, 1941, Central Mediterranean. From 3,000 feet up, HMS Illustrious already looks dead. Smoke boils out of her hangar. Her flight deck is bent like a broken spine. The carrier has stopped answering her helm, and her wake is a crooked smear of white behind her. In the cockpit of a Stuka, a gunner watches the burning shape below, keys his mic and laughs. She's finished. Another crew joins in. From up here it looks obvious. You don't walk away from this. Down on that deck, Associated Press reporter Larry Allen is trying to stand up on hot, twisted steel. His notebook is gone. His shin is bleeding where a hatch tore the skin off. Around him, hoses writhe and die as water pressure vanishes and comes back in sickening pulses. Fire is eating through the hangar. The aft lift is a torn ring. Men are coughing in smoke and still dragging more hose forward. The armor the Germans mocked as propaganda is the only thing holding the ship's insides together. The steering is dead, but the engines still turn. The Luftwaffe came out today to prove that British armoured carriers were a lie. In the next few hours, roughly 50 dive bombers will throw themselves at this one ship, hit her again and again, kill her pilots and tear her flight deck open. From the air, the Stuka crews will go home certain they've sunk her. They're half right. They turned Illustrious into a burning wreck in the middle of the Mediterranean. What they didn't kill was the thing that actually decides whether a ship lives or dies. The people inside her. Over the next 8 hours, flooding, burning, listing, those men will drag that finished carrier more than 200 miles to Malta, steering her by engines alone. The Stukas sank her. She just refused to sink. Earlier that morning, Alan had been leaning against the bridge rail with his notebook, writing down the routine. The sun was warming the steel. The hum of the ventilation system hummed behind the bridge windows. The navigating officer's quiet voice gave course corrections. 18 knots. Course 220. Everything normal. He noted the shape of those escorts, warspite sitting out there to port like a grey cathedral, valiant to starboard like a fortress of sharp angles and steel. Then the first alarm cut through everything. A voice, clipped, professional, called out a radar return. Just like that, the calm was gone. Alan looked up from his notebook and watched the faces around him change. Everyone was suddenly tense. Phones on the bridge started lighting up with orders. Somewhere back toward the stern, a bell clanged. The whole ship swung into readiness. The first Stukas came diving down, 25, maybe more. By the time the waves were done, roughly 50 dive bombers would take their turn. The sky literally split open. Wings folded into knife edges. Those dive sirens ripped through your chest. These dives were so steep, they looked like they were throwing physics around. Alan didn't see the first impact. He felt it. The deck lurched like it was shrugging, and he went down on one knee. The next blast hit him in the ribs. A guy next to him laughed, just one quick bark, the kind of laugh that means nobody's joking anymore. Glass shattered in the window frames. Someone yelled, "Take cover!" But there was always another order that mattered more. Alan tried to steady himself, and then the next explosion picked him up and threw him down through a hatchway. The edge of the metal hatch tore skin off his shin. His notebook flew out of his hands. He landed on a lower ladder, dazed, holding onto the rail as the whole ship groaned around him. Up on the flight deck, the steel wasn't behaving like steel anymore. It was bending. A bomb punched straight through and went off above the hangar deck. Fire spread, this dirty orange river of flame eating through fuel, fabric, paint. Hoses started skittering across the deck. A nozzleman knelt down to hold a fire hose and felt it fight him. strong, then weak, then strong again as the water pressure kept dropping. The air tasted like metal. Men were yelling names. Some names yelled back. Some didn't. Armor helped, but it wasn't magic. A bomb in the wrong place could open everything up. The escorts couldn't do much against bombs dropping straight down from above. The Fulmars were off chasing a torpedo threat somewhere away from the ship, so suddenly the deck was completely exposed. Everything changed from staying in control to just trying to survive. Alan found his notebook wedged on one of the rungs and climbed back up, favoring the leg that was now screaming at him. He listened because that's what reporters do. The ship's heartbeat had changed. That steady hum had this hitch in it now. Somewhere, metal was grinding where it shouldn't be. He wrote 2 words, still standing. Then he added, under attack by roughly 50. He didn't actually know if 50 was exact, but it felt right. Roughly 50 dive bombers isn't just a number. It's how many times something punches the air out of your lungs in an hour and makes you swallow smoke. 3 inches of armor isn't just a measurement either. It's whether the water stream pushes back into your palm when you're fighting a fire, or if it just dies because something's broken. Saying 18 knots at first, then slower, tells you something about how the day went. But the real story's in other details. A deck edge bent like a bitten lip. The way the ship's voice changes from a steady hum to something that sounds like gasping. When a dive bomber drops its load at that steep angle, all that energy's coming straight down, almost vertical. Armor laid flat helps against glancing blows and shrapnel. But if that bomb hits in just the right spot, the hangar, the lifts, the steering, it punches straight through. That's why those first minutes matter so much. That's why the aft lift becomes a twisted ring. That's why the hangar fire starts trying to become its own weather. A petty officer was yelling for hose teams to clear the lift well. A chaplain was exactly where he needed to be. A runner was pushing through smoke with tears streaming down his face, mouth open, trying to breathe air that burned. Someone was dragging an injured man away from twisted metal, and a thin line of blood inched along the deck until it disappeared into a drain, staining the water below in a pattern that looked like a map of a place nobody wants to go. On the bulkhead, someone was marking sections with chalk as they got checked and fire boundaries held. It looked like math. It looked like hope. A gun crew on the starboard side worked their mount like a ritual, load, aim, fire, while the pointer kept his cheek on the pad and watched a black cross get bigger in his sight picture, then vanish under smoke and tracer fire. The sky was full of paths. Some ended in water, some hit the decks. Some turned into bright confetti in the air when shells burst too high or too low to matter. A loader's hands were bleeding through his gloves, but he didn't even notice because the work had him completely. The ship went from feeling invulnerable to being in shock. The only thing that mattered now was the people on it. The men who didn't fly, who weren't reporters, men who worked with their hands on hot metal. They were deciding whether the Illustrious lived or died. It's early afternoon when orders come down to change course. But the message never makes it to the water. The helmsman spins the wheel and feels it go slack. The rudder's either jammed or the lines are cut. Someone runs a note up the ladder. Helm not answering. The answer comes back quick. Con by engines. Steer her with the throttles instead of the rudder. Down below, where the only light comes from what men make with their hands, leading stoker Trevor Jones is working in heat that feels like standing in front of an open furnace. Valves screech when they move. Steam lines shake. One blast knocked a gauge blind. Another cracked a casing held together now by a temporary clamp that everyone down here knows won't last forever. The air smells like hot oil and warm brass. Every step sends vibration through their boots. A ship like Illustrious has two propellers, each with its own shaft. Normally, the rudder steers by pushing against the water behind both screws. But if the rudder won't work, there's another way. Run more power to one engine and less to the other. More to the port engine and less to starboard, and the ship swings to starboard. Less to port, more to starboard, and she swings the other way. At 15 knots instead of 18, the turns are wider and slower. The telegraph clangs. Numbers get shouted down. Port ahead 2/3, starboard slow. The throttlemen move their levers in the heat and noise until the engines hit different notes. If those notes slip, the turn falls apart. If the temperature climbs too high, the bearings fail. The trick is to keep the power uneven without breaking the engines. A lieutenant strips his voice down to roar so it carries over the noise. Hold port at 2/3, east starboard to 1/4. Now! Jones's hands are black up to his wrists. He can feel the detents click through his gloves. A near miss slaps the hull hard, and every gauge needle jumps. The ship slides like it's moving through concrete. Repeat, comes down the pipe. She's not answering. They try again. Port up, starboard down. Count to 3 and keep it smooth. Feel for the vibration that says the stern is biting. Watch the dust on a light fixture to see if it drifts the other way. Wait. Then, there. Just enough. The deck above tilts slightly. Someone down here lets out a breath they didn't know they were holding. The ship lost her 18 knots at impact. Now she makes 15 on a good run, less in a turn. Every knot lost buys a little more control, a little less of a target. The first hour cost about 5 aircraft. By the second hour, it's up to roughly 14. 9 Swordfish, 5 Fulmars, half a wing gone. The numbers buy minutes. Minutes buy time to put something between yourself and what's trying to kill you. Larry Allen limps down a passageway, the deck still vibrating under his feet. His notebook's back in his pocket now. He's got the phrase down. Steering by engines. It sounds right, and it fits a headline. He pushes through a door and smoke hits him. A stretcher party squeezes past, their faces pale, one man's sleeve dark with water and something worse. He hears a name called out twice, Loudon! And the silence after that tells him more than any report. Sub-Lieutenant Henry Norman Loudon of 806 Squadron won't answer again. Up on the flight deck, near the warped lift, the fire has a mind of its own. Hose lines move in and get beaten back. Black smoke rolls into the sky. The wind shifts and shows orange flames pushing through the gaps. A petty officer with sweat streaking through the soot on his face decides to cut away a piece of twisted metal that's trapping heat. He could be wrong. The air rushes in and the fire rolls. Or he could be right. The steam does its job. He pulls the trigger on the cutter and keeps his hands steady. Alan makes it back to the bridge. A boatswain's mate on the voice pipe sends a message that's short and simple. She answers. Men who work with machines like to keep it that way. The machines either do what you need or they don't. Today, they do. Somewhere above, a Stuka crew circles and watches the carrier turn. Not smooth and neat, but turning. They thought 2 good hits would finish it. By the 5th dive, they're learning that what you believe and what works aren't the same thing. The rudder won't work. Human hands move the throttles instead. The ship turns. A swordfish pilot named Charles Lamb will fly a line from Hope straight to the ocean. and a destroyer will be the only reason anyone ever hears his story. It's mid-afternoon, and the sky's still mean out there. Lieutenant Charles Bentel Lamb has the stick of his swordfish steady in his hands, turning back toward home, toward where the carrier's supposed to be waiting. The biplane thumps along the way they do, fabric wings shaking in the wind gusts. He checks his fuel gauge, then looks out at the horizon where the carrier should be. But it's not the same place it was this morning. The aft lift is torn up, the hangar's a wreck, and fires are burning in spots all over the deck. Hoses snake everywhere with foam running and smoke drifting thick. The wind's all wrong for landing. The batsman's working his paddles through the smoke, and Lamb lines up, gets the signal, but he can't trust what he's seeing down there. A good landing needs steady wind, a clean approach, and a batsman you believe in. Right now, the deck's clogged with hoses and people, and the ship's steering herself weird because she's got no choice. A swordfish can fly slower than most planes, slow enough to land where others would just fall out of the sky. But close to the deck? That's where the wind becomes a punch. One bad bounce and his nose goes into those hoses, or his wing clips a prop, or burning fuel spills across men already fighting fire. Lamb makes his call. He tells his crew to hold on, lines up into the wind, feels the rough air pushing back. The engine coughs. He's running on the last of his fuel, and it's sloshing to the wrong side of the tank. He lifts the nose just a hair and sets her down on the water, careful as he can. The impact takes his breath. Then there's a heavy float as the canvas and wood accept what they've become, right here in the Mediterranean. HMS Juno cuts through the spray, her grey bow knifing forward. Men on her deck throw lines and shout over the noise of her engines. A petty officer roars, "Heave!" in a voice that sounds like rope and salt water. The line hits Lamb's arm. He ties it to himself, ties it to his crew, and a dozen hands haul them up and over the rail in one hard jerk that hurts in the best way. A stoker on deck claps him on the shoulder and grins, the kind of grin you see on men who just took something back from the sea. Back on Illustrious, the count keeps going. 14 aircraft, 9 Swordfish and 5 Fulmars are being checked off against the odds. One Fulmar's hunting for the deck through a gap in the smoke, waves off twice because fuel's running low. On the damaged deck, a crash tender groans and roars while a mechanic kicks a stubborn pump back to life. Fire teams push the black edge of the fire backward, foot by foot. These men want work they can understand, not surprises. Larry Allen's standing near a stretcher, writing down fragments because those are all he can hold. Singed and blown down a hatchway, still under attack. Aft lift a ring. He watches a chaplain bend close to someone who won't hear words but might hear the tone of a voice. Next to him, a signalman with a sooty face, except for tear streaks, is fixing a flag line. Malta rises out of the haze like some animal's back. The shape of forts and church domes says harbour, the way a hand on your shoulder says friend. 15 knots feels like a win right now. The escort ships snap at shadows. Nobody's betting this is over. Damage control keeps grinding on. A flash here, a hidden ember there, a hatch you test with the back of your hand before you open it. Somewhere below, 2 men are drinking water that tastes like smoke, and they're grateful anyway. Someone reads names off a casualty board on a catwalk. Allen writes 2, Henry Norman Loudon and Trevor Jones. He knew they were here when it mattered. He writes them down because forgetting would be another kind of damage. By late afternoon, the few attackers still out there look down and see what's really there. Not a ship sinking, but a ship limping, and absolutely refusing to go under. The words acceptable losses don't mean much when the target you were sure was finished is still leaving a wake behind it. The planes disappear as the day goes on, but the people don't. The air power shrinks, but the endurance grows. This isn't a story about how strong the ship is anymore. It's about how hard she is to kill because of who's inside her. One time matters more than any other today. 21:04 hours, at the breakwater of Grand Harbour. The lights going, sky draining colour, slow and steady. The ship talks to herself in metal, low and even, like someone breathing after a burn. In, out. One more. A harbour pilot climbs up a rope ladder, his boots finding the steps the way they always do. Habit, mostly. At the top, he nods at the bridge officer. He knows this water so well he can feel how deep it is just by standing on it. But then he notices the scorch marks on the paint and the way the deckhands are standing, shoulders carrying 10 hours of weight, and he understands. Something's happened here. Grand Harbour's like a stone bottle with a tight neck. A damaged carrier coming in at night means the pilot can't expect this ship to move like she should. He has to think ahead. Guess at the lag between what he orders and what actually happens. He works with bearings on shore lights, radioed distances, the shadow of stone. He feels his way through it all. The carrier's got just enough speed to steer, but not so much she can't correct herself if she needs to. The escort ships are up front and along the sides. Below deck, the throttle men are making tiny, careful adjustments. The lines on deck are coiled up like sleeping snakes, ready to move when someone says the word. From the old fortresses and the three cities, Maltese families are watching this shadow pass by, bigger than a church, moving like a wounded whale. The windows are blacked out because of the air raids, but people stand in their doorways anyway, facing the water. A dockyard worker in a flat cap says, "Still on fire," and that phrase spreads along the stone like gossip. Up on the bridge, everyone's talking quietly. Steady. Lines ready. Easy to starboard. The quartermaster repeats every order back. A lookout says, "Breakwater." The carrier passes the breakwater just after 9 at night. 3 heavy escorts in daylight, 1 battered carrier in darkness, 14 aircraft gone. Casualty numbers that will turn into names, funerals, the sound of a letter opening at someone's kitchen table. The ship never gets back to her top speed. What mattered was hitting that stone throat at the right angle, and the men working the throttles. Men who'd learned to listen with their hands. Larry Allen writes in the dark with a pencil stub that tears the paper. From the bridge of the aircraft carrier Illustrious, he writes. The words look like a man walking with a limp, crooked and determined. He looks back and sees heat still coming off the metal. He's thinking about the phrase he'll use to explain this to people who weren't here. Steering by engines. He's got the names on his mind, the ones he wrote down. He doesn't write his own. On deck, a bosun's whistle pipes out, thin and high. Lines go to shore. A petty officer says, "Make fast," and the rope runs through hands with that rough sound that means work's done. A man sits on a coil and drops his chin to his chest for 10 seconds. Another lights a cigarette and forgets to breathe it in until someone nudges him. A body from sickbay comes down the gangway on a stretcher. A dock worker touches the frame with 2 fingers. The enemy had one good idea, a simple one. We can sink an armoured carrier if we hit it hard enough all at once. They hit it. The carrier didn't sink. The wall that stopped them isn't steel. It's people who stayed where they were when leaving would have been easier. Invulnerable. That was just a belief. Hard to kill. That's what you get after hours of refusing to go under. But the story isn't finished. Being alive at sea is one thing. Being alive in dock is something else. The bombing runs that come next are going to try to finish what started today. It's January 16th in Malta. Sirens scream through the streets, that flat, metallic wail you never get used to. Dockyard workers move under a sky that seems to watch their every step. The enemy doesn't have to chase the carrier out to sea anymore. She's sitting right here in the harbour, still smoking, heat glowing like coals buried under ash. The air swings between ice cold and thick with burning oil. It smells like plaster dust. The kids in Malta can tell what kind of bomb it is just by listening. When the bombs keep falling, you fix things in layers. The chief artificers work it out in their heads, decisions that actually matter. First, stop what kills you in the next 10 minutes. Fires, flooding, losing power, ammunition going off. Then get the ship moving. Steering, engines, communication lines so people can actually talk to each other. After that, keep her a ship. Watertight doors, braced frames, temporary pipes and wires. It's more tools in the dock, but nowhere to go when the sirens sound. When the air becomes a weapon, men just lie flat between the machines and wait for it to pass. January 16th, then the 19th. Bombs hit streets and roofs that should never have been targets. A statue in Senglia stares out over a gap where an entire block just disappeared. The harbour shakes. Dust jumps off everything. The air turns white with powdered stone. The merchantman Essex is tied up unloading about 4,000 tons of ammunition. When a bomb hits, it doesn't explode. These crews know exactly what moves where and when. They flood sections, cut off the damage, hold their breath. In seconds, they decide what risk they can actually survive. More dead civilians, more wounded, piles of stone that used to be someone's bedroom, someone's kitchen. Henry Norman Loudon and Trevor Jones, now just empty chairs at the dinner table. A repair crew chalks a number on the wall, keeping count of the valves they checked through the night, and they laugh. Counting helps. Larry Allen walks the quay with his pencil, writing scraps because full sentences don't feel honest. A dock worker tells him, "Bless them. Every man on that ship. Every person on shore who ran toward the sound." Allen writes it down. It's short and true. The German reports say losses are acceptable. Air superiority locked in by February. The dock at the end of January tells a different story. The main target is beaten up, but on the 23rd, she casts off and heads for Alexandria. January 23rd. The lines slip. The screws turn. The carrier noses out of the Grand Harbour. Nobody cheers. Fatigue keeps things quiet. The island watches her go, like a friend who's paid enough and needs to recover somewhere else. A petty officer nods at a stoker who made the right call at exactly the right second. A kid slept through one of the raids and woke up to see a ship leaving under her own power. An armoured carrier everyone thought was safe. A single day that proved safety is just a story. People who made survival happen. Before noon, she looked untouchable. By nightfall, she was scorched but alive. The enemy expected it to end, and instead, they got a problem that wouldn't end on their schedule.